She was the billionaire's personal assistant, until one stolen kiss in the elevator ruined him. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She never expected her life to change on a Tuesday. Sierra Lane adjusted her charcoal blazer as the elevator climbed silently toward the 42nd floor of the Roth Enterprises Tower. The morning light filtered through the glass walls of Manhattan's financial district, casting long shadows across the marble lobby she'd left behind. In her hands, she clutched a leather portfolio containing the quarterly reports that would determine the fate of 3 overseas subsidiaries. Just another Tuesday in the life of Damien Roth's personal assistant. But Sierra had learned that in Damien's world, nothing was ever just another anything. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the executive floor. Sierra stepped into the pristine hallway, her heels clicking against the polished marble with practiced precision. The early morning silence felt heavier than usual, broken only by the distant hum of the city, 42 stories below. "Good morning, Ms. Lane." The voice belonged to Jefferson, the building's head of security, who nodded respectfully as she passed. "Morning, Jeff. Any word on whether Mr. Roth is in yet?" Jefferson glanced at his watch. 7:15 a.m. "He arrived an hour ago. Conference room 3, the Tokyo call." Sierra's stomach tightened slightly. Damien never took international calls this early, unless something had gone wrong. Very wrong. She made her way down the corridor past the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Central Park in the distance. The Roth Enterprises logo, a sleek, minimalist R that somehow managed to look both elegant and intimidating, was etched into the glass doors of the main office suite. Sierra paused outside Conference Room 3, listening. Damien's voice carried through the soundproof glass, low and controlled, but she could detect the edge that others missed. After 3 years as his assistant, she'd learned to read the subtle variations in his tone like a meteorologist reading storm patterns. This was definitely a storm. She knocked twice, their agreed signal, and waited. A moment later, the door opened, and she found herself face to face with Damien Roth. At 40, he possessed the kind of presence that could fill a room before he even spoke. Today, he wore a navy Tom Ford suit that fit his tall frame perfectly, his dark hair slightly tousled from running his fingers through it, a habit he'd developed during stressful calls. His steel-grey eyes met hers briefly before scanning the portfolio in her hands. "The Henderson reports?" he asked, stepping aside to let her enter. "Everything you requested, plus the backup files from Singapore." Sierra set the portfolio on the mahogany conference table, careful not to look at the wall of monitors displaying stock prices from markets around the world. The numbers were red, very red. Damien closed the door behind her, and suddenly the room felt smaller. It was just the two of them, surrounded by the soft glow of the city lights and the weight of whatever crisis was unfolding in Tokyo. "How bad is it?" Sierra asked, surprising herself with the question. It wasn't her place to ask, but something in his expression told her this wasn't the time for formal protocols. Damien moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "We're about to lose a $2 billion contract because someone in our Tokyo office decided to get creative with the quarterly projections." Sierra felt her breath catch. $2 billion. She'd handled Damien's schedule, his meetings, his life for 3 years, but numbers like this still had the power to stop her heart. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. He turned from the window, and for a split second, she saw something she'd never seen in Damien Roth's eyes before: uncertainty. It lasted only a moment, replaced quickly by the familiar mask of control, but Sierra had seen it. "Cancel everything for the next 48 hours, he said, moving to the conference table and opening the portfolio. "I need you to book us on the next flight to Tokyo. We leave tonight." "Us?" The word slipped out before Sierra could stop it. Damien looked up from the reports, his grey eyes meeting hers directly. "I'm going to need someone I can trust completely. Someone who knows how this company really works, not just how it's supposed to work." Sierra felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the crisis in Tokyo. In 3 years, Damien had never once indicated that he saw her as anything more than an efficient assistant. She was good at her job, exceptional even, but she'd always assumed he viewed her the same way he viewed his laptop or his phone, a necessary tool for getting things done. "I'll handle the arrangements," she said, reaching for her phone. "Sierra." His voice stopped her mid-motion. It was the first time he'd used her first name in months. "This won't be easy. The board is already circling, and if we can't fix this—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Sierra understood. If they couldn't fix this, Damien Roth, the man who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd never lost a major contract, who was featured on the cover of Forbes 3 times, would face his first real defeat. "We'll fix it," Sierra said, and she meant it. Something shifted in Damien's expression, so subtle that anyone else would have missed it. But Sierra caught it, the way his shoulders relaxed slightly, the almost imperceptible nod, the brief moment when his carefully constructed walls seemed to lower just enough to let her see the man behind the CEO. "Book us first class," he said, turning back to the reports. "And Sierra, pack for at least a week. This is going to take time." As Sierra left the conference room, her mind was already working through the logistics, flights, hotels, the dozen other details that would need to be arranged within the next few hours. But underneath the familiar rhythm of planning and organizing, something new was stirring. For the first time in 3 years, Damien Roth had truly seen her, not just as an assistant, but as someone he could depend on when everything was falling apart. Sierra didn't know it yet, but that Tuesday morning in a glass conference room 42 stories above Manhattan would be the moment everything changed. The perfect storm was just beginning. What happens when the most powerful man in the city realizes he can't face his biggest crisis alone? And what price will they both pay for crossing the invisible line between professional and personal? The first-class cabin felt like a cocoon suspended between two worlds. Sierra adjusted her seatbelt as the Boeing 777 climbed through the night sky, leaving the glittering coastline of New York far below. Across the narrow aisle, Damien sat with his laptop open, the blue glow illuminating his sharp features as he worked through what had to be the 100th spreadsheet of the evening. She'd managed to book them on the 11:30 p.m. direct flight to Tokyo, a minor miracle given that it was the height of business travel season. But Sierra had learned that when you worked for Damien Roth, impossible was just another word for requires more phone calls. "The Yamamoto contract details," Damien said quietly, sliding a thick manila folder across the space between their seats. "I need you to understand every clause before we land." Sierra accepted the folder, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment. She'd touched his hand countless times over the years, passing documents, helping him with his coat, the routine contact that came with being someone's professional right hand. But tonight, in the intimate lighting of the cabin, that simple touch sent an unexpected jolt up her arm. She buried herself in the contract, grateful for the distraction. The legal language was dense, full of international trade regulations and liability clauses that would have given most people a headache. But Sierra had taught herself to read these documents during her first year as Damien's assistant, staying up late in her modest Brooklyn apartment, determined never to be the weak link in his operation. "Kendrick Industries has a competing bid," she observed after scanning the 3rd page, "but their timeline is 6 months longer than ours." Damien looked up from his laptop, and she caught something like surprise in his expression. "You understand the technical specifications?" "I made it my business to understand them," Sierra replied, meeting his gaze. "You can't effectively manage someone's schedule if you don't know what their meetings are actually about." A slight smile tugged at the corner of Damien's mouth, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him all day. "Most assistants don't bother learning the substance. Most assistants don't work for you." The words hung between them in the quiet cabin. Around them, the other first-class passengers were settling into sleep, pulling blankets over themselves or adjusting their fully flat seats into bed mode. But Sierra felt more awake than she had in months. "Can I ask you something?" Damien closed his laptop, giving her his full attention for the first time since they'd boarded. "Why did you take this job?" The question caught Sierra off guard. In 3 years, he'd never asked her anything personal, beyond whether she needed time off for holidays or doctor's appointments. "I needed the work," she said simply. "Fresh out of Columbia with a business degree and more student loan debt than I care to think about, your predecessor, Thaddeus, gave me a chance when nobody else would." "That's not what I meant." Damien's voice was softer now, almost contemplative. "You could have moved on after 6 months, a year, found something with better hours, less pressure. Why did you stay?" Sierra considered the question, watching the clouds drift past the window like cotton scattered across black velvet. The honest answer was complicated, layered with ambition and pride, and something else she'd never quite named. "Because you challenged me," she said finally. "Every day you expected more than I thought I could give, and somehow I kept finding ways to give it." Damien was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim cabin light. "You're not what I expected when Thaddeus recommended you." "What did you expect?" "Someone temporary, Someone who would burn out after a few months of 60-hour weeks and last-minute international trips. He paused. Someone who wouldn't notice when I stayed late at the office because I didn't want to go home to an empty apartment. The admission hung in the air between them, more intimate than anything they'd ever shared. Sierra felt her heart rate quicken, suddenly aware of how alone they were in their private section of the cabin. "Mr. Roth, Damien," he said quietly. "When it's just us, you can call me Damien." The sound of his first name felt strange on her lips, like speaking a language she'd studied but never practiced. "Damien," she repeated, testing the weight of it. He leaned back in his seat, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked almost vulnerable. The perfectly pressed shirt, the expensive watch, the commanding presence, all of it was still there. But underneath, Sierra glimpsed something raw and human. "I built this company from nothing," he said, his voice barely audible over the drone of the engines. "Worked 18-hour days for 10 years straight. And somewhere along the way I forgot how to have a conversation that wasn't about quarterly earnings or market projections." Sierra felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening that she'd kept carefully locked for 3 years. "Is that what this is? A conversation?" Damien's eyes met hers, and the air between them seemed to charge with electricity. "I think it might be." The plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing Sierra to grip her armrest. Without thinking, Damien reached across the aisle and covered her hand with his. "It's just rough air," he said softly. "We'll be through it in a moment." But as Sierra looked down at his hand covering hers, strong, warm, completely steady, she realized the turbulence she was feeling had nothing to do with the weather at 30,000 feet. It was the moment she stopped seeing Damien Roth as just her boss and started seeing him as a man who might be looking at her the same way she was looking at him. Tokyo welcomed them with neon and chaos. Sierra's body clock insisted it was still midnight in New York, but the bustling streets outside the Hotel Okura's floor-to-ceiling windows told a different story. It was 2 p.m. local time, and the city hummed with an energy that made Manhattan look sleepy by comparison. "The Nakamura meeting is in 3 hours, Damien said, reviewing his phone as they stood in the marble lobby. His usually immaculate appearance showed the first signs of their 14-hour journey. His tie slightly loosened, his hair no longer perfectly in place. Somehow, Sierra thought, it made him look more human. "I've arranged for Hiroshi Tanaka to meet us beforehand," Sierra replied, consulting her tablet. "He's the cultural liaison Thaddeus recommended, someone who can help us navigate the subtleties." Damien nodded, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. This wasn't his usual boardroom, where his reputation preceded him and his word carried absolute weight. Here they were on foreign ground, playing by rules he hadn't written. "Adjoining suites," Sierra continued, holding up 2 key cards. "I thought, given the time difference and the amount of coordination we'll need—" "Smart thinking," Damien said, accepting his key. "I'll need you close for the next few days." The words were perfectly professional, but something in his tone made Sierra's pulse quicken. She told herself it was the jet lag, the stress of the situation, anything but the memory of his hand covering hers on the plane. They rode the elevator to the 20th floor in comfortable silence, the city sprawling endlessly below them through the glass walls. When the doors opened, Sierra realized just how luxurious adjoining suites meant in a hotel like this. Her room alone was larger than her entire Brooklyn apartment. "I'll be ready in 2 hours, Damien said, pausing at his door. "And Sierra, thank you for coming with me. I know this wasn't part of your job description." Before she could respond, he disappeared into his suite, leaving Sierra standing alone in the elegant hallway, her heart doing something that definitely wasn't in her job description either. She used the time to shower and change into her most professional outfit, a charcoal gray dress suit that she'd bought specifically for high-stakes meetings. As she applied her makeup, Sierra caught herself wondering what Damien would think, then immediately scolded herself for the thought. A soft knock on the connecting door interrupted her internal lecture. "Come in," she called, assuming it was room service with the coffee she'd ordered. Instead, Damien stepped through the doorway and Sierra's breath caught. He'd changed into a fresh suit, this one a deep charcoal that emphasized his tall frame and made his gray eyes look almost silver. But it was the expression on his face that stopped her cold. "We have a problem," he said quietly. "Lysander Beaumont just landed in Tokyo." Sierra felt her stomach drop. Beaumont was the CEO of Meridian Global, Roth Enterprises' biggest competitor. If he was here, it meant, "He's making a play for the Nakamura contract," she said, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "Worse, according to my contact at Haneda Airport, He brought a full negotiation team, and Cordelia Nash. The name hit Sierra like a physical blow. Cordelia Nash was legendary in international business circles, a negotiator so skilled she'd once convinced a Saudi prince to sell oil rights to a company he'd never heard of. If Beaumont had brought Nash, he wasn't just making a play, he was going for the kill. "How much time do we have?" Sierra asked, her mind already racing through contingencies. "Nakamura's office called 10 minutes ago. The meeting's been moved up. They want to see both proposals today, back to back." Damien ran a hand through his hair, disrupting its careful styling. "We're first." Sierra stood up, smoothing her skirt and grabbing her portfolio. "Then we'd better be perfect." But as they walked toward the door, Damien caught her arm gently. "Sierra, I need you to know, if this goes badly, if we lose this contract, it's not your fault. You've done everything right." She turned to face him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. They were standing close now, closer than they'd ever stood in his Manhattan office. She could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that she'd caught hints of during late-night strategy sessions, but never really noticed. "We're not going to lose," she said firmly. "You built this company by being smarter and working harder than everyone else. Beaumont might have Nash, but he doesn't have you." Something flickered across Damien's face. Surprise, gratitude, something deeper that Sierra couldn't quite name. For a moment she thought he might say something, might acknowledge the charge that had been building between them since they'd boarded the plane in New York. Instead, he smiled. A real smile, not the practiced corporate expression she'd seen him use in 1,000 meetings. "You're right," he said softly. "Let's go show them why Roth Enterprises doesn't lose." As they left the hotel and climbed into the waiting car, Sierra felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement. The stakes couldn't be higher. $2 billion, Damien's reputation, possibly the future of the company. But sitting beside him in the back seat as Tokyo rushed past the windows, she realized something that should have terrified her. She'd never felt more alive. The car pulled up to a gleaming office tower in the heart of Tokyo's business district. Through the tinted windows, Sierra could see another black sedan parked at the curb, undoubtedly Beaumont's team, already inside and probably already making their pitch. "Ready?" Damien asked, his hand resting on the door handle. Sierra met his eyes, seeing her own determination reflected back at her. "Let's go save your empire." The Nakamura Corporation boardroom felt like a temple to modern commerce. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Tokyo Bay, while minimalist furniture in rich woods and gleaming steel created an atmosphere of quiet power. At the head of the polished conference table sat Kenji Nakamura himself, a man in his 60s whose calm demeanor masked one of the sharpest business minds in Asia. Sierra took her seat beside Damien, acutely aware of Lysander Beaumont's team occupying the opposite side of the room. Beaumont was younger than she'd expected, maybe 45, with sandy hair and the kind of practiced charm that probably worked wonders at charity galas. Beside him, Cordelia Nash sat like a coiled spring, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, her pale blue eyes missing nothing. "Mr. Roth," Nakamura said in accented but precise English, "thank you for making the journey on such short notice. I understand there have been complications with your Tokyo projections." Damien's expression didn't change, but Sierra caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Someone had been talking. Someone with access to information that should have been confidential. "The projections were overly optimistic," Damien replied smoothly. "I prefer to deal with reality, Mr. Nakamura, which is why I'm here personally to present our revised proposal." Across the table, Cordelia Nash smiled, the kind of smile a shark might give a wounded seal. "How refreshingly honest," she said, her British accent crisp as winter air. "At Meridian Global, we prefer to exceed expectations rather than revise them downward." Sierra felt her jaw clench. The woman had been in the room for less than 5 minutes and was already drawing blood. "Perhaps we should begin with the presentations," Nakamura suggested diplomatically. "Mr. Roth, you have the floor." Damien stood, and Sierra watched him transform. Gone was any trace of the tired businessman from the hotel room, replaced by the commanding presence that had built Roth Enterprises from nothing. He moved to the presentation screen with fluid confidence, his voice carrying easily across the room. 6 years ago, Nakamura Corporation took a risk on a relatively unknown American communications firm, he began. Today, that partnership has generated over $12 billion in revenue and established your presence in 43 countries. Sierra watched the faces around the table as Damien spoke. Nakamura remained impassive, but she caught several of his executives exchanging glances that suggested they remembered those early, successful years. "Our proposal for the next phase isn't just about maintaining that success," Damien continued, clicking to a slide that showed projected market growth across Southeast Asia. "It's about positioning Nakamura Corporation to dominate markets that don't even exist yet." For the next 20 minutes, Damien laid out a vision that was both ambitious and meticulously researched. Sierra found herself holding her breath as he navigated complex technical specifications and regulatory challenges with the ease of someone who had lived and breathed every detail for months. When he finished, the room was silent for a long moment. "Impressive," Nakamura said finally. "Mr. Beaumont, your presentation." What followed was a masterclass in corporate warfare, disguised as a business proposal. Beaumont was smooth, charming, full of promises about faster timelines and higher returns. But it was Nash who delivered the killing blows, picking apart Roth Enterprises' recent financial performance with surgical precision. "Of course," she said, her voice honey over steel, "we must consider the stability of our partners. Roth Enterprises has experienced some volatility in their Asian markets recently. 3 executives have resigned in the past 6 months. Stock prices have fluctuated by 30%. One has to wonder about internal management." Sierra felt her hands curl into fists beneath the table. Every word was technically accurate and completely devastating. "Those resignations were part of a planned restructuring," Damien replied calmly. "And stock volatility in emerging markets is hardly unique to Roth Enterprises." "Planned restructuring," Nash repeated, as if tasting something unpleasant. "Is that what they're calling it?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Sierra could see Nakamura's executives taking notes, their expressions growing more concerned with each pointed question Nash raised. Then, without thinking, Sierra did something that would have been unthinkable in any other meeting. She stood up. "May I address Ms. Nash's concerns?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fact that every eye in the room was now focused on her. Damien looked surprised, but not displeased. Nakamura gestured for her to continue. "Ms. Nash is correct about the volatility," Sierra said, moving to stand beside Damien. "What she hasn't mentioned is that Roth Enterprises is the only American firm to maintain positive growth in Asian markets over the past 18 months. While our competitors have pulled back during uncertain times, we've invested more deeply in partnerships like this one." She clicked to a new slide, one she'd prepared during the flight but hadn't planned to use. Meridian Global's proposal promises faster timelines, but their timeline for the Mumbai expansion was 6 months behind schedule. Their Berlin project was abandoned entirely after cost overruns exceeded budget by 40%. Nash's smile faltered slightly. Beaumont shifted in his seat. "The question isn't whether Roth Enterprises has faced challenges," Sierra continued, her confidence growing with each word. "The question is whether you want a partner who runs from challenges or one who solves them." When she sat down, Sierra could feel her heart pounding. She'd just committed career suicide, speaking out of turn in a meeting of this magnitude. But when she glanced at Damien, she saw something in his eyes that made her feel like she'd just conquered the world. "Thank you, Ms. Nakamura inquired. "Lane. Sierra Lane." "Ms. Lane raises excellent points," Nakamura said thoughtfully. "Gentlemen, ladies, we'll need time to review both proposals. You'll have our decision by tomorrow evening." As they filed out of the boardroom, Sierra caught Nash watching her with newfound interest. "Nicely done," the older woman said quietly as they passed in the hallway, "though I hope you're prepared for the consequences of making yourself a target." Outside the building, as they waited for their car, Damien turned to Sierra with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That was either brilliant or completely insane," he said. "I vote for brilliant," Sierra replied, surprised by her own boldness. Damien stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes. "How you just saved us in there, you know that, don't you?" Looking up at him in the soft glow of Tokyo's afternoon light, Sierra realized that somewhere between the plane and this moment, everything had changed. She wasn't just his assistant anymore, she was his partner in this fight, and judging by the way he was looking at her, he'd realized it too. The hotel bar was nearly empty at 11 p.m., save for a few late-night business travelers nursing whiskey and regret. Sierra sat alone at a corner table, still wearing her presentation suit, but with her jacket draped over the chair and her hair finally released from its professional bun. The wine in front of her, her excellent Bordeaux that cost more than her monthly subway pass, was barely touched. Her mind kept replaying the meeting. analyzing every word, every gesture, every possible interpretation of Nakamura's carefully neutral expression. "Mind if I join you?" She looked up to find Damien standing beside her table, his tie loosened and his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He'd changed from his suit jacket into a simple white button-down that somehow made him look more approachable, more human. "Couldn't sleep either?" Sierra asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Too much adrenaline," Damien replied, settling into the seat and signaling the bartender. "Macallan 18, neat," he called out, then turned his attention back to Sierra. "You were incredible today." The words hung between them, more intimate than any compliment he'd ever given her in 3 years of working together. Sierra felt heat rise in her cheeks and blamed it on the wine. "I was terrified," she admitted. "When I stood up, I had no idea what I was going to say." "But you said it anyway." Damien's drink arrived, and he took a small sip before continuing. "Do you know what most people see when they look at Cordelia Nash? A legendary negotiator? A predator," Damien said quietly. "Someone who's built her reputation on dismantling opponents piece by piece, and you looked her in the eye and called her bluff." Sierra swirled the wine in her glass, watching the burgundy liquid catch the amber light from the bar's vintage fixtures. "She wasn't wrong about the volatility. Your company has been through a lot this year." "Our company," Damien corrected, and Sierra's heart skipped at the casual possessiveness in his tone. "And yes, it's been difficult, but that's what happens when you're trying to build something that lasts instead of just maximizing quarterly profits." He leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes intense in the low light. "Thaddeus warned me about you, you know." Sierra's stomach dropped. "Warned you?" "He said you were too smart to stay an assistant forever. Said I'd better figure out how to make you a partner, or risk losing you to someone who would." "And what did you tell him?" Damien's smile was rueful. "That I was arrogant enough to think I could keep you content with efficiency evaluations and modest raises." The honesty in his voice caught Sierra off guard. She'd spent 3 years wondering if he even noticed her beyond her ability to manage his calendar and anticipate his needs. To discover that he'd been thinking about her career, her future, her potential. "What changed your mind?" she asked softly. "Today, watching you stand up in that boardroom and fight for something you believed in." Damien's fingers traced the rim of his whiskey glass. "I realized I'd been seeing you as my assistant, when what I really had was my equal." The words settled between them like a challenge, changing the very air in the space they occupied. Sierra felt something fundamental shift, the careful boundaries they'd maintained for 3 years beginning to blur at the edges. "Damien," she began, but he held up a hand. "I know this is complicated. I know there are a dozen reasons why we shouldn't even be having this conversation." He set down his glass and met her eyes directly. "But I also know that somewhere between New York and Tokyo, I stopped being able to pretend that what I feel for you is purely professional." Sierra's breath caught. There it was, the acknowledgement of everything that had been building between them, spoken aloud in a dimly lit hotel bar 12 time zones away from their carefully constructed professional lives. "The company has policies," she said weakly, though even as the words left her mouth she knew how hollow they sounded. "The company has policies about relationships between supervisors and subordinates," Damien replied. "But if you're truly my equal, if you're truly my partner, then those policies don't apply." Sierra looked at him across the small table, this man who commanded boardrooms and influenced markets, who appeared on magazine covers and made decisions that affected thousands of people. But in this moment, in this quiet corner of a Tokyo hotel bar, he looked vulnerable, uncertain, human. "What are you asking me?" she whispered. Damien reached across the table, his fingers covering hers. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, just as it had on the plane, but this time she didn't pull away. "I'm asking if you feel it too," he said quietly. "This thing that's been growing between us. The way you look at me sometimes when you think I'm not paying attention. The way I catch myself watching you work and forgetting whatever meeting I'm supposed to be thinking about." Sierra stared down at their joined hands, her dark skin against his lighter tone, his strong fingers intertwined with her more delicate ones. It should have felt wrong, crossing this line they'd never even acknowledged existed. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I feel it," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. "I've felt it for months, but I was afraid that admitting it would ruin everything we'd built. And now?" Sierra looked up to meet his eyes, seeing her own uncertainty and hope reflected back at her. "Now I'm afraid that not admitting it will ruin everything we could build." Damien's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, and Sierra felt her carefully constructed professional walls beginning to crumble. They were in uncharted territory now. No corporate handbook to guide them, no precedent to follow. "The Nakamura decision comes tomorrow," she said, trying to ground herself in practical concerns. "Yes. And if we lose the contract, then we face it together." Damien's voice was steady, certain. "And if we win?" Sierra felt a smile tug at the corners of her mouth. "Then we celebrate together." The last word hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and promise. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands still joined, both understanding that they'd crossed a threshold from which there was no return. "I should probably go upstairs," Sierra said finally, though she made no move to leave. "Probably," Damien agreed, though his fingers tightened slightly around hers. But as they sat in that quiet hotel bar, Tokyo glittering beyond the windows, neither of them was ready to let go of this moment, the moment when everything changed. Sierra woke to the soft chime of her phone and sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of her hotel suite. For a moment, she lay still, watching Tokyo come alive 40 floors below. The city moved like a living organism, trains threading between buildings, people flowing along sidewalks in purposeful rivers. But her mind wasn't on the urban symphony outside. It was on the memory of Damien's fingers, intertwined with hers, the weight of words that couldn't be taken back. The phone chimed again. A text from Damien. "Meeting moved to 4 p.m. Nakamura wants to see us separately first. You at 2. Sierra sat up, her heart rate spiking. Separate meetings weren't good. In her experience, separate meetings meant someone wanted to divide and conquer, to test whether both parties were telling the same story. She was reaching for her robe when a soft knock came at the connecting door. "Come in," she called, assuming it was housekeeping. Instead, Damien stepped through, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression she couldn't quite read. He'd showered and dressed for business, charcoal suit, silver tie, every inch the powerful CEO. But Sierra caught the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightness around his eyes. "Thought you might need caffeine," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Thanks." Sierra accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "About the separate meetings, I know what you're thinking," Damien interrupted, moving to the window. "That Nakamura is trying to find inconsistencies between us. Aren't you worried?" He turned to face her, and Sierra was struck by how different he looked in the morning light. Still commanding, still devastatingly handsome, but somehow more accessible, more real. "About the business?" "Yes. About us being on the same page professionally?" He shook his head. "We've been perfectly synchronized for 3 years. That doesn't change overnight. And personally?" The question hung between them, heavy with the implications of everything they'd said the night before. Damien set down his coffee and moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. "That's more complicated," he admitted. "I've been thinking about what happens after Tokyo, about what this means for us back in New York." Sierra felt her stomach clench. In the intimacy of the hotel bar, with wine and adrenaline and the surreal atmosphere of being half a world away from home, their confession had felt natural, inevitable. But now, in the harsh light of morning, she could see all the obstacles they'd ignored. "The company policies are just the beginning," she said quietly. "There's the media attention, the speculation about whether I earned my position or whether we've been involved all along. You think I haven't considered that?" Damien's voice was sharper than she'd expected. "You think I would risk your reputation, your career, for some midlife crisis fling?" The words hit Sierra like a physical blow. "Is that what you think this is?" "No," Damien said immediately, running a hand through his hair. "God, no. That's what everyone else will think. That's what the board will assume, what the press will write, what our competitors will whisper." He moved to the couch, sitting heavily and burying his face in his hands. "I built this company from nothing, Sierra. Worked 18-hour days for 10 years, sacrificed everything personal for professional success. And you're the best thing that's happened to my life in longer than I can remember." Sierra felt her heart clench at the raw honesty in his voice. She moved to sit beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "So what are we supposed to do?" she asked softly. "Pretend last night never happened? Go back to being just colleagues?" "I don't know if I can do that anymore." Damien looked up at her, his gray eyes intense with emotion. "But I also don't know how to protect you from the fallout if we move forward." Before Sierra could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed a number she didn't recognize, with a Tokyo area code. "Ms. Lane?" The voice was crisp, professional, speaking accented English. "This is Genevieve Holt from Nakamura Corporation. Mr. Nakamura would like to meet with you privately before this afternoon's presentation. Could you come in at noon instead of 2? Sierra felt Damien tense beside her. Private meetings that got moved up were rarely good news. "Of course," Sierra replied. "Should I bring anything specific?" "Just yourself, Ms. Lane. Mr. Nakamura is particularly interested in discussing your role in yesterday's presentation." After hanging up, Sierra turned to find Damien watching her with concern. "That can't be good," he said. "Maybe it is." Sierra stood, pacing to the window. "Maybe he wants to offer me a position with Nakamura Corporation. Poach me from Roth Enterprises. Would you take it?" The question was asked quietly, but Sierra heard the weight behind it. She turned to study Damien's face, seeing vulnerability there that he rarely showed. "3 days ago I might have considered it," she said honestly. "It would be a massive career advancement, the chance to work directly with one of the most respected business leaders in Asia." "And now?" Sierra moved back to the couch, sitting close enough that their knees almost touched. "Now I know that some opportunities come with too high a price." Relief flickered across Damien's features, followed by something deeper, a tenderness that made Sierra's breath catch. "I should probably get ready for the meeting," she said, though she made no move to leave. "Sierra." Damien reached out, his fingers grazing her cheek with such gentleness that she felt tears prick her eyes. "Whatever happens today, whatever Nakamura decides, we'll figure this out, together." The promise hung between them like a lifeline. Sierra leaned into his touch, allowing herself this moment of connection before the day demanded they return to their professional masks. "Together," she repeated, the word feeling like both a vow and a leap of faith. As Damien left her suite to prepare for his own meeting, Sierra found herself staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was the same one who'd boarded a plane in New York 3 days ago, but everything had changed. She was no longer just Sierra Lane, efficient personal assistant. She was Sierra Lane, business partner. Sierra Lane, the woman who'd captured the heart of one of the most powerful men in America. The question was whether she was strong enough to handle everything that came with those new identities. In 4 hours, she'd have her answer. Kenji Nakamura's private office was a study in understated power. Unlike the stark modernity of the boardroom, this space felt warm, almost intimate. Traditional Japanese artwork hung alongside contemporary pieces, and a small Zen garden occupied one corner, its carefully raked sand patterns creating a sense of calm that Sierra desperately needed. "Please, sit," Nakamura said, gesturing to a pair of leather chairs arranged near the windows. He was smaller than he'd appeared in the boardroom, perhaps 5'6", with silver hair and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to see everything. "Tea?" "Thank you," Sierra replied, settling into the chair and accepting the delicate porcelain cup he offered. The tea was jasmine, its floral scent helping to steady her nerves. Nakamura took his time preparing his own tea, the ritual clearly important to him. Sierra waited, understanding instinctively that rushing this conversation would be a mistake. "Tell me, Ms. Lane," he said finally, settling into the chair across from her, "how long have you been in love with Damien Roth?" Sierra nearly choked on her tea. Of all the questions she'd prepared for, this wasn't one of them. "I'm sorry," she managed, her voice surprisingly steady. Nakamura smiled, a gentle expression that transformed his austere features. "I have been in business for 40 years, Ms. Lane. I have seen every kind of partnership, every variety of professional relationship. But what I witnessed yesterday in that boardroom, that was not merely professional." Sierra felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Mr. Nakamura, I can assure you that my relationship with Mr. Roth is completely professional." He raised an eyebrow. "The way you stood up to defend him, the way he looked at you when you spoke, the subtle communication between you that required no words." Nakamura shook his head. "No, Ms. Lane. That level of trust, that intuitive understanding, it comes from something much deeper than a working relationship." Sierra set down her teacup, her hands trembling slightly. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because it changes everything," Nakamura said simply. "In my culture, we understand that the strongest business partnerships are built on personal bonds that transcend mere profit. When I saw you two together yesterday, I realized I wasn't just choosing between two companies. I was choosing between two philosophies." He stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the bustling city below, Meridian Global offers efficiency, profit margins, quarterly results. They see our partnership as a transaction, valuable certainly, but ultimately replaceable. And Roth Enterprises? Nakamura turned back to her, his expression thoughtful. Roth Enterprises offers something much rarer. A partnership built on personal investment, on people who care deeply about the outcome, not just for their shareholders, but for each other. Sierra felt her pulse quicken. Are you saying... I'm saying that your presentation yesterday revealed more than market analyses and profit projections, Nakamura interrupted. It revealed two people who fight for each other with the same passion they fight for their company. That kind of partnership is worth more than all the efficiency reports in the world. He returned to his chair, leaning forward slightly. But I'm also saying that such partnerships come with unique vulnerabilities. What happens to the Nakamura contract if your personal relationship with Mr. Roth becomes complicated? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sierra realized this wasn't just about business anymore. It was about her future, her integrity, her willingness to be honest about what she wanted from life. Mr. Nakamura, she said carefully, if you're asking whether I would let personal feelings compromise my professional judgment, the answer is no. I've worked too hard to build my reputation to throw it away for anyone, even for love. Sierra met his eyes directly. Especially for love. Real love doesn't ask you to sacrifice your principles. It asks you to be the best version of yourself. Nakamura nodded slowly, as if she'd passed some kind of test. And what if your relationship with Mr. Roth changes the dynamic of your working partnership? Then we'll adapt, Sierra replied with more confidence than she felt. The best partnerships evolve. They grow stronger, not weaker, when the people involved are willing to be honest about what they need from each other. Interesting. Nakamura stood again, this time moving to his desk. I've made my decision about the contract, Ms. Lane, but before I announce it, I want to make you a proposition. Sierra's stomach dropped. Here it was, the job offer she'd anticipated, the career opportunity that would solve all her problems, by taking her completely out of Damien's orbit. Nakamura Corporation is expanding our North American operations, he continued, opening a file folder. We need someone to head the new division, someone who understands both American business culture and international markets, someone with exceptional analytical skills and the courage to speak truth to power. He handed her a document that made her eyes widen. The salary figure alone was 3 times what she made at Roth Enterprises, with stock options and benefits that would set her up for life. It's a generous offer, Sierra said slowly. More than generous. It's transformative. Nakamura returned to his chair. But it would require you to relocate to Tokyo permanently, to leave Roth Enterprises, to leave Mr. Roth. Sierra stared at the contract, her mind racing. This was everything she'd worked toward. Independence, financial security, the chance to build something of her own. But it would mean walking away from Damien just as they'd found each other. You don't have to answer now, Nakamura said gently. Take time to consider what you truly want from your life, Miss Lane. Career advancement is important, but it's not everything. He stood, signaling that their meeting was coming to an end. I'll announce my decision about the main contract at 4 o'clock, but know this. Regardless of what you decide about my personal offer, you have my respect. You're exactly the kind of executive the business world needs more of. As Sierra left Nakamura's office, the contract folder clutched in her hands, she felt like she was walking through a dream. In the space of 1 hour, her entire future had been rewritten. She could have everything she'd ever wanted professionally, but only if she was willing to give up everything she'd just discovered she wanted personally. The elevator descended in silence, carrying her back toward a choice that would define the rest of her life. When the doors opened on the ground floor, Sierra stepped out into the bustling Tokyo afternoon, knowing that in 3 hours she would have to face Damien with news that would change everything between them. The question was, what did she truly want to choose? The hotel room felt like a prison cell. Sierra paced between the window and the door, the Nakamura contract lying open on the coffee table like an accusation. Every few minutes she found herself reading the salary figure again, as if the numbers might change or make more sense with repetition. 3 times her current income, stock options, a corner office overlooking Tokyo Bay, complete independence from the complicated web of feelings that had entangled her life over the past 3 days. Everything she'd ever wanted, served on a silver platter. So why did the thought of accepting it make her feel like she was drowning? A soft knock at the connecting door interrupted her internal spiral. Sierra, can I come in? Damien's voice, cautious and concerned. Sierra grabbed the contract and shoved it into the desk drawer before calling out, "It's open." He entered carrying a bottle of water and wearing an expression that told her his own meeting hadn't gone according to plan. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his tie hung loose around his neck. "How did it go with Nakamura?" he asked, settling into the armchair across from where she stood. "Complicated," Sierra replied, which was perhaps the understatement of the century. "You?" Damien leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. "He offered me the contract." Sierra felt her heart stop. That's incredible. "Damien, that's everything we worked for. On one condition." He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze directly. "He wants to restructure the partnership, more oversight, quarterly reviews, and—" He paused, running a hand through his hair. "He wants you to be the primary liaison, not just my assistant, the actual point person for the entire account." Sierra sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind reeling. "What does that mean?" "It means promotion, significant salary increase, your own team. Essentially, you'd be running the Asian division of Roth Enterprises." Damien's voice was carefully neutral, but Sierra caught the undercurrent of something else. Pride, maybe, or fear. Sierra struggled to find words. "That's a life-changing opportunity." "Yes, it is." Damien stood, moving to the window. "Nakamura was very specific about why he wants you in that role. He said you have something most executives lack, which is the courage to speak truth to power, the ability to see what others miss, and—" He turned back to her. "Unshakable integrity." Sierra felt tears prick her eyes, though she couldn't entirely say why. "What did you tell him?" "That the decision was yours to make." Damien moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. "I won't be the person who makes career choices for you, Sierra. I've seen too many brilliant women held back by men who thought they knew better." The words hit Sierra like a physical blow, highlighting the impossible position she found herself in. If she told Damien about Nakamura's offer, would he see it as betrayal, or would he encourage her to take it, thinking it was what was best for her career? "There's something else," Damien continued, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "Nakamura knows." "Knows what?" "About us. About whatever this is between us." He gestured vaguely between them. "He made some comment about the most successful partnerships being built on personal trust. Said he could see it in the way we work together." Sierra's stomach clenched. "What did you say?" "Nothing. What could I say?" Damien moved to sit beside her on the bed, close enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. "That I've spent the last 3 years falling in love with my assistant, and I'm just now brave enough to admit it." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and completely devastating. Sierra felt her carefully constructed walls begin to crumble entirely. "Damien, I know it's complicated," he said quickly. "I know there are a dozen reasons why this is a terrible idea. But I also know that I can't imagine going back to New York and pretending that nothing has changed between us." Sierra looked at him, really looked at him. The expensive suit couldn't hide the vulnerability in his posture, the uncertainty in his gray eyes. This was Damien Roth stripped of his corporate armor, offering her his heart with no guarantee that she wouldn't break it. "What are you asking me?" she whispered. "I'm asking if you'll take a chance on us, on whatever we could build together." He reached out, his fingers grazing her cheek with infinite gentleness. "I'm asking if you'll stay." The word hit Sierra like a lightning bolt. Stay. Accept the promotion. Take on the Asia division. Build something incredible together, both professionally and personally. It was everything she could want, wrapped up in one impossible choice, except for the small matter of the contract hidden in her desk drawer. The contract that offered her a different kind of everything: independence, security, the chance to build something that was entirely her own. "I need to tell you something," Sierra said, her voice barely audible. But before she could continue, Damien's phone buzzed with an urgent tone. He glanced at the screen and cursed softly. "It's Nakamura's office. The 4 o'clock meeting has been moved up again. They want us there in 30 minutes. Sierra felt panic rise in her throat. 30 minutes to make the most important decision of her life. 30 minutes to choose between security and love, between independence and partnership, between the life she'd planned and the life she'd never dared to imagine. "We should go," she said, standing quickly. Damien caught her hand, stopping her before she could move away. "Sierra, whatever happens in that meeting, whatever Nakamura announces, I want you to know that these past few days have been the best of my life. Not because of the business, but because of you." He pulled her closer, and Sierra found herself looking up into his eyes, seeing her own conflicted emotions reflected back at her. He began, but Sierra pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping him. Don't, she whispered. Not yet. Not until I can say it back without reservation. Damien nodded, understanding flickering in his expression. He pressed a gentle kiss to her fingertips before releasing her hand. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave for what could be the most important meeting of their lives, Sierra felt the weight of the hidden contract like a stone in her chest. In 30 minutes, she would have to make her choice, and whatever she decided would change everything. The elevator ride to the 43rd floor felt like descending into judgment. Sierra stood beside Damien in the mirrored confines, watching their reflection multiply into infinity. They looked perfect together, the successful CEO and his polished executive partner, but Sierra felt like she was fracturing from the inside out, the weight of her hidden secret threatening to crush her completely. Whatever happens, Damien said quietly, his eyes meeting hers in the reflection, we face it together. Sierra's heart clenched. Together, the word that had become their promise, their foundation, their hope. And she was about to shatter it with a truth she should have shared hours ago. The elevator chimed, and the doors opened to reveal the same elegant hallway they'd walked 3 days earlier. But everything felt different now, charged with consequence, heavy with the knowledge that the next 30 minutes would determine not just the fate of a business deal, but the trajectory of their lives. Kenji Nakamura waited for them in the main conference room, but this time he wasn't alone. Seated around the polished table were 5 other executives, their expressions carefully neutral. At the far end, Lysander Beaumont and Cordelia Nash sat like opposing generals, their confident postures suggesting they expected victory. Mr. Roth, Ms. Lane, Nakamura said, rising to greet them. Please take your seats. Sierra settled into her chair, hyper-aware of Damien's presence beside her. Across the table, Nash regarded her with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her professional facade. Before we begin, Nakamura said, returning to his position at the head of the table, I want to address something that has become clear during our individual meetings. This decision is not simply about choosing between 2 companies. It's about choosing between 2 philosophies of partnership. He gestured toward Beaumont's team. Meridian Global offers efficiency, proven results, and the kind of structured relationship that minimizes risk and maximizes predictable returns. Beaumont nodded confidently, his sandy hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Roth Enterprises, Nakamura continued, turning his attention to Sierra and Damien, offers something more complex. A partnership built on personal investment, mutual trust, and the kind of deep collaboration that can either create extraordinary success or spectacular failure. Sierra felt her mouth go dry. She could sense where this was heading, and it wasn't anywhere she'd prepared for. The question, Nakamura said, settling into his chair, is whether such a partnership can survive the complications that inevitably arise when business and personal relationships intersect. A heavy silence fell over the room. Sierra was acutely aware of her heartbeat, of the slight tremor in her hands, of the way Damien had gone perfectly still beside her. Ms. Lane, Nakamura said, his voice gentle but commanding, would you care to share with the room the offer I made to you this morning? The words hit Sierra like a physical blow. Every eye in the room turned to her, but she could only focus on Damien's face as understanding dawned in his grey eyes. The trust, the partnership, the foundation they'd built, she watched it all crumble in the space of a heartbeat. Sierra began, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Nakamura offered Ms. Lane a position as head of North American operations for Nakamura Corporation, she heard herself say, the words tumbling out in a rush. Effective immediately. Based in Tokyo, triple her current salary plus stock options. The silence that followed was deafening. Sierra couldn't bring herself to look at Damien, couldn't bear to see the betrayal she knew would be written across his features. And your response? Nash asked, her voice sharp with interest. Sierra finally found the courage to meet Damien's eyes. What she saw there wasn't anger or betrayal, it was understanding, and something that looked remarkably like pride. My response, Sierra said, her voice growing stronger, is that Mr. Nakamura is right about partnerships. The best ones aren't built on avoiding complications. They're built on facing them together. She stood, surprising herself with the steadiness of her movement. The offer is incredibly generous, and I'm honored by the confidence it represents. But I've spent 3 years building something at Roth Enterprises. Not just a career, but a partnership that challenges me, inspires me, and makes me better at everything I do. Sierra moved to stand behind her chair, her hands gripping the leather back for support. Great partnerships require trust, complete trust, and I should have told Mr. Roth about your offer the moment I received it. She turned to face Damien directly. I was afraid that if you knew, you'd encourage me to take it because you thought it was best for my career, or that you'd think I was using it as leverage. But keeping it secret was the real betrayal. Damien stood slowly, his expression unreadable. Why didn't you take it? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sierra felt every person in the room waiting for her answer, but there was only one person whose opinion truly mattered. Because, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the most successful partnerships aren't built on what you can gain from them. They're built on what you're willing to invest in them. She took a breath, feeling the words shift something fundamental inside her chest. I'm not interested in a job that takes me away from the person who makes me want to be better. I'm interested in building something extraordinary with someone She paused, meeting his eyes directly. Someone I love. The words settled over the room like a benediction. Sierra felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated, exposed and protected, vulnerable and strong. Damien crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. I love you too, he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the silent room. And if you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life building extraordinary things with you. Before Sierra could respond, he kissed her. It wasn't the desperate, stolen kiss from the elevator in New York that had started this whole journey. This was a promise, a commitment, a declaration that they were choosing each other in front of witnesses. Consequences be damned. When they finally broke apart, Sierra became aware of the room around them again. Nakamura was smiling, his executives looked pleased, and even Nash appeared grudgingly impressed. Only Beaumont looked frustrated, clearly recognizing that he'd just lost more than a business deal. Well, Nakamura said, standing and beginning to applaud slowly, I believe that settles the question of which partnership philosophy will serve Nakamura Corporation best. As the applause spread around the room, Sierra felt Damien's arms slip around her waist, anchoring her to this moment, this choice, this life they were about to build together. They had chosen each other, and somehow, that felt like winning everything. 6 months later, the view from the 42nd floor looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed. Sierra stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of what was now her corner office, watching the early morning light paint Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold and amber. Her reflection stared back at her, the same woman who had boarded a plane to Tokyo, but wearing a confidence that ran deeper than professional success. The Henderson reports are ready for your review, came a familiar voice from the doorway. Sierra turned to see Damien leaning against the frame, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, and a smile that still made her heart skip beats. He wore a charcoal suit that emphasized his tall frame, but there was something different about the way he carried himself now, lighter, more at ease. Mr. Roth, Sierra said, accepting the coffee with exaggerated formality. I believe we have a meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock. Ms. Lane, he replied, his grey eyes dancing with amusement. I believe we have a dinner reservation scheduled for 7:30. The easy banter felt natural now, the perfect balance they'd found between their professional partnership and personal relationship. It hadn't been simple. There had been board meetings, policy revisions, and more than a few raised eyebrows when news of their relationship had spread through corporate circles. But Nakamura had been right about partnerships built on personal trust. The stronger their bond became, the more effective they were as business partners. How's the Yamamoto expansion looking? Damien asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. Ahead of schedule and under budget, Sierra replied, pulling up the quarterly reports on her tablet. Hiroshi thinks we'll be ready to launch the Singapore phase 6 weeks early. Damien nodded, but Sierra caught the slight distraction in his expression. After 6 months of reading his moods, she'd learned to recognize when something was occupying his thoughts. What is it? She asked, setting down her coffee. The Times wants to do a feature story, he said carefully, about the company's expansion into Asia, about our unconventional partnership structure. Sierra felt her stomach tighten slightly. Media attention had been one of their biggest concerns when they decided to make their relationship public. What kind of feature? The good kind, actually. Damien's smile was genuine now. They want to focus on how personal trust translates into business success, Apparently, our Tokyo announcement has become something of a case study in business schools. A case study in what? Authentic leadership. The article's working title is When Love Becomes Leadership, How Roth Enterprises Redefined Corporate Partnership. Sierra laughed, surprising herself with the sound. That's either the most romantic or the most mortifying headline I've ever heard. I vote for romantic, Damien said, standing and moving around her desk to lean against the edge. But I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with the attention. I know privacy has been important to you. Sierra looked up at him, this man who had learned to consider her feelings before making decisions that affected them both. The gesture was small, but it represented everything they'd built together. Respect, equality, genuine partnership. I think, she said slowly, that I'm tired of hiding what we've accomplished, both professionally and personally. Damien's smile lit up his entire face. So that's a yes to the interview. That's a yes to the interview. Sierra stood, closing the distance between them until she could straighten his tie, a gesture that had become routine and intimate and perfectly them. But I have one condition. Name it. We do it together. Equal time, equal quotes, equal partnership. I'm not going to be portrayed as the love interest who got lucky. I'm the executive vice president of Asian operations who happens to be in love with her business partner. Damien's hands settled on her waist, and Sierra felt the familiar warmth that came from his touch. Have I mentioned lately that I'm crazy about your brain? Show me, Sierra said, rising on her toes to meet his kiss. It was supposed to be brief, a quick moment of connection before the day's meetings began. But 6 months in, kissing Damien still felt like coming home and embarking on an adventure at the same time. When they finally broke apart, Sierra was grateful for the early hour that meant the office was still mostly empty. We should probably, she began, but was interrupted by a soft knock at her office door. Come in, Sierra called, stepping back from Damien with professional smoothness. The door opened to reveal Thaddeus Greystone, Damien's former assistant and Sierra's mentor, carrying a thick manila folder and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief that suggested he knew exactly what he was interrupting. Just reviewing the quarterly reports, Damien replied smoothly. What's in the folder? The Nakamura expansion proposal, Thaddeus said, setting the folder on Sierra's desk. Kenji wants to discuss opening operations in Australia and New Zealand. He specifically requested that the negotiations be handled by the partnership that proves business is personal. Sierra and Damien exchanged a look that contained entire conversations, excitement, challenge, the thrill of building something bigger than either of them could have imagined alone. When does he want to start? Sierra asked. Next month. Sydney first, then Auckland. Thaddeus paused, his expression growing more serious. There's something else. Nakamura wants to make you both equal partners in the venture. Full profit sharing, joint decision-making authority. He's essentially offering you the chance to build your own division within his empire. Sierra felt her breath catch. Equal partners. Not assistant and boss, not senior executive and subordinate, but true equals building something extraordinary together. What do you think? Damien asked quietly. His voice meant only for her. Sierra looked at him. This man who had challenged her, supported her, loved her, and never once asked her to be anything less than exactly who she was. 6 months ago, she'd been terrified of crossing the line between professional and personal. Now she understood that the best partnerships didn't have lines, they had foundations. I think, she said, her voice steady and sure, that some storms are worth weathering together. Damien's smile was brilliant, transformative, full of the future they were about to build. Then let's weather them all. As Thaddeus left them to review the proposal, Sierra returned to the window, watching the city wake up below them. Somewhere out there, other people were facing their own impossible choices, their own moments of truth, their own decisions about whether to play it safe or risk everything for love. She hoped they were brave enough to choose love, because sometimes, Sierra had learned, the most dangerous thing you can do is play it safe, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can build is a partnership that refuses to choose between professional success and personal happiness. Standing there in her corner office, with the man she loved reviewing expansion plans that would take them to the other side of the world, Sierra Lane had never felt more powerful, or more ready for whatever storm came next. 2 years later, the elevator descended through 42 floors of steel and glass, carrying Sierra Lane Roth toward the marble lobby where her story had begun. She pressed her left hand against the cool metal railing. the simple platinum band on her ring finger catching the afternoon light. 2 years had passed since that Tokyo meeting that changed everything. 18 months since Damien had proposed on a Sydney harbour bridge, and 6 months since their wedding in a small ceremony overlooking Central Park. Today marked the end of another chapter, literally. The contracts in her briefcase would officially establish Roth Lane International as an independent entity, separate from both Roth Enterprises and Nakamura Corporation, with offices in New York, Tokyo, Sydney, and London. "Ready for this?" Damien asked softly, his voice carrying the same warmth it had held that first morning when he'd brought her coffee in Tokyo. Sierra turned to study her husband, still breathtakingly handsome in his navy suit, still commanding in his presence, but softer somehow. Marriage had taught them both that true partnership meant knowing when to lead and when to follow, when to stand strong and when to bend. "More than ready," she replied, adjusting the collar of his shirt with the casual intimacy that had become second nature. "Are you nervous about the Times photographer?" "Only about whether they'll capture how incredible you look when you're about to conquer the world," Damien said, his grey eyes sparkling with the humour that had sustained them through board meetings, expansion negotiations, and the occasional disagreement about whose turn it was to make coffee. The elevator chimed as they reached the ground floor. Through the glass doors, Sierra could see the familiar chaos of Manhattan's financial district. Yellow cabs threading between buses, people moving with purposeful urgency. The endless energy of a city that never slept. But there was something different today. A small crowd had gathered outside the Roth Enterprises building, and Sierra realized with surprise that they were holding signs. Not protests, congratulations. Messages of support from employees, business partners, even a few competitors who'd come to respect what they'd built together. "Did you know about this?" Sierra asked as they approached the doors. Damien's smile was answer enough. "Thaddeus may have mentioned that people wanted to show their appreciation for what we've accomplished." As they stepped outside, Sierra was overwhelmed by the warmth of the reception. Faces she recognized from years of meetings and conferences, colleagues who'd become friends, competitors who'd become collaborators, and there, in the center of it all, stood Kenji Nakamura, with a smile that transformed his usually serious features. "Mrs. Roth," he said, approaching with his characteristic dignity but unmistakable affection. "Or should I say, Ms. Lane Roth, co-CEO of Roth Lane International." "Mr. Nakamura," Sierra replied, accepting his respectful bow with one of her own. "Thank you for being here, for everything. I wouldn't miss the launch of what I predict will become the most successful international consulting firm of the next decade," he said. "You have both proven that the most powerful partnerships are built on trust, respect, and—" He paused, his eyes twinkling with subtle humor. "Love that is strong enough to weather any storm." As photographers captured the moment, Sierra found herself thinking about the woman who had stood in this same spot 2 years ago, terrified of crossing invisible lines, afraid to risk everything she'd worked for. That woman couldn't have imagined this moment. Not just the professional success, but the deep contentment that came from building a life with someone who saw her as an equal partner in everything. "The car is ready," Damien said quietly, his hand finding the small of her back. They were headed to the airport for a flight to London, where they would spend the next month establishing their European operations. It was ambitious, demanding work that would test every skill they'd developed both individually and together. But Sierra felt the familiar thrill that came from facing challenges alongside the person who understood her completely. As they settled into the back seat of the car, Manhattan blurring past the windows, Sierra caught sight of the Roth Enterprises building growing smaller in the distance. Somewhere in that tower, a new generation of assistants and executives were learning to navigate the complex dance between ambition and authenticity, between professional success and personal fulfillment. "Do you ever miss it?" Damien asked, following her gaze. "The simplicity of when it was just about work." Sierra considered the question seriously. There had been something clean about those early years. Clear hierarchies, defined roles, measurable success. But it had also been lonely, limited, safe in a way that had ultimately felt like a prison. "I miss the certainty sometimes," she said honestly, "but I wouldn't trade the complexity. Not for anything." Damien's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the same natural ease they'd discovered that night in Tokyo. "Even when the complexity includes board meetings about whether married co-CEOs violate corporate governance standards." Sierra laughed, remembering the 6-hour debate that had nearly derailed their partnership structure. "Especially then. We proved that love doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave enough to fight for what matters. And what matters most? Damien asked, though they both knew the answer. Building something bigger than either of us could create alone, Sierra replied, and doing it with the person who makes you want to be better every single day. As their car merged into traffic heading toward JFK Airport, Sierra felt the familiar anticipation that came with new beginnings. London would bring fresh challenges, different markets, the opportunity to test everything they'd learned about partnership against entirely new circumstances. But for the first time in her professional life, Sierra wasn't facing the unknown alone. She was facing it with someone who would celebrate her victories, support her through setbacks, and never ask her to choose between love and ambition, because he understood that for her, they had become the same thing. The plane that would carry them toward their next adventure was already waiting on the tarmac, engines warming, destinations set for the future they would build together. And Sierra Lane Roth, co-founder and co-CEO of Roth Lane International, wife and equal partner to the man beside her, had never been more ready to fly. Some storms, she had learned, don't destroy you. They teach you how to soar. Final message: what would you risk for a love that makes you stronger? Have you ever had to choose between security and the chance to build something extraordinary with someone who sees your true potential? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.